Hello and welcome to my podcast, Learn Reiki and Connect, and it's with me, Tracy Matthews. So I hope you're well and now settling in just to listen, because this is really the place and the space where we're helping each other to connect to that light within, because we are going through a spiritual awakening and there is a remembering of who we are at soul level. So this podcast is really helping people to help them through difficult parts of the physical life and the experiences, but really to see it through the lens of the soul, because what that does, it helps us to see our truth, helps us to understand and translate what it all means, so that we can go through these difficult experiences and grow and learn, but understand as we evolve on our path, on our purpose. And of course, I always mention this is really the part of you and I that knows why we're here, and we know that to be the higher self. That's the part of you that is the light, and that's the bigger me, the soul. So we're going to jump straight in, and in this podcast we are talking about death is not the ending of life. So how do we know that? And I'd like to sort of share some experiences of my own and share in particular what I have found in my work, because that has added validity to that phase, that sentence, and has added weight as to why death is not the ending of life. So we're going to look at this, and we're going to look at really what happens, when we experience the loss of a loved one. And like I said, I'd like to share really what I found in my work, because I think that's going to really help you to sort of through when we go through different experiences. And if you're tuning into this podcast now, I would really encourage you to stay with me, to listen in and stay tuned. So hit that subscribe button, because we're going to look at what happens at death and how death is not the ending to life, but something else. So let's look at when we experience loss of a loved one. This is a really painful experience, because it really creates such a void and a loss. And depending on the closeness and of the person, and again, if that relationship is really close, that loss impacts us. It almost like an imprint, because it changes us. And in some respects, it shapes us. Because with loss, sometimes we can never be the same again after we've experienced that. And I think we all grieve in different ways. And if anyone is going through that, or has experienced loss either recently or has done, I really kind of want to just share and send out a healing light and just that hug of source energy right now, because it's really tough. Because when we talk about subjects like this, it can trigger us. And that can trigger memories. Or maybe it resurfaces painful feelings that we thought we kind of buried for a little bit. So I just bring that light and that white light energy right in, right now. Because it can be really hard. It can be really painful when we're trying to sort of navigate and move through loss. But it can also serve as something else. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this subject. And that's due to really an experience that I had. And I'd like to share it with you rather. Because in 2018, that was quite a hard time for my personal family. We had a loss of my partner, and the girls had a loss of their grandma. So in the space of the end of 2018, we actually had 2 funerals within 2 weeks. And that was really hard. And you know, if you know when you go through stuff like that, it's you almost go into a fog. You almost go into a space where you feel quite numb. You know, there's a lot of emotion, then having to sort of, you know, connect up with family. You know, so it's really quite, like I mentioned, a hard time and quite triggering for family members and friends. But this is what I wanted to share with you because I remember sitting in my car, and this is like, you know, when the funerals had been done. And, you know, 2019 for me, I don't remember much of that because most of it I was grieving. Most of it I was in a little bit of a space where I kind of needed to be by myself. You know, and that might resonate with you, and you might be going through that now, or you can identify what that feels like. So not much was going on for me. Life was still going on, but for me, it's like I went into a bit of a lost state. And, you know, that's even with sort of when we do become, you know, on our journey and we understand and we know certain things. Like at that time, I knew about souls, about what we're talking about now. But sometimes it's not until we go through these personal losses and the losses get more closer. And like I mentioned, maybe it's the person that something shifts in us. Something's different to perhaps bereavements that we'd felt before. So like I said, I remember sitting in my car and looking over at the graveside really and sort of sensing an energy. And I remember on this particular time, I got a sense that my partner was near me. That although the physical body and in the grave, that was where the body was, I actually felt him very close to me. And my angel and my guides, they always sort of like, when they want me to know something, I really get a sense of a feeling or a thought. And on this particular time, I remember just sort of daydreaming, just looking over at the graveside. And I got a feeling and some thoughts that I needed some kind of information. So, and I'm not sure if you can resonate, if you know that, maybe that's something that you felt with yourself, that you get a sense that a loved one is actually near you and actually around you. So anyway, on this occasion, I remember picking up my mobile phone and I literally opened it and it went straight on to YouTube. And the first video that I saw when I clicked on was Michael Newton. And he was talking about the journey of souls. And you know what? I sat there for about an hour or so, perhaps even longer, and I just listened. I just listened to what was being said. And you know what? There was a shift for me. That's where something really quite significant happened. Because there was a little bit of a shift in my awareness. It's like I knew certain things, but now I really knew other things. You know, perhaps then was the time I was ready to remember what really happens when we die. And not only that, but, you know, when it comes to death, it's not the ending of life. My goodness, that really resonated. And the reason being, if you haven't heard much about Michael Newton, I would suggest and encourage you, go and check him out, because he was a hypnotherapist. He was also a past life regressionist. And he wrote a couple of books where he shared his case studies. And these case studies were all from real people over a number of years. And basically what happens when we die and where do we go. But the most significant And the most incredible bit that I hadn't been perhaps fully conscious of is the fact that what he talks about and what he shares was all to do with life between lives. So I'm going to say that again, because when I heard that I found that quite impactful. Life between lives. Because I don't think I'd ever thought about it before. You know, what's your feelings on that? What's your sort of thoughts really about that? Because I guess for me in 2018, I sort of knew that we were souls, that we did live on, and I was aware of past lives. And if any of you have been listening to my other previous podcasts, I talk about the Akashic Records, you know, and that all started really sort of hitting home to me in 2013. I knew I'd been here before. But at this point, I hadn't quite thought about what am I and who I when I'm not in a life. You know, was there a life between lives? And what was that life? You know, what was it? What did it look like? You know, how do you feel about that? Where are you up to in your, just your spiritual journey? What you know about now? Because it sort of was interesting how this came at the really most vulnerable time of losing someone really dear to me, that it was like, now this was the most divine time for me to remember, actually we don't die. You know, and on a personal note, this sort of really started my journey with past life regression when I started doing my studying some time after this. But this is what really got to me, that there is life between the lives that we are living in the physical body. So that's really quite interesting, and just wondering what's going through you as you sort of like listening to this, and perhaps what's brought you to listen to this podcast. Because certainly for me, at that time, I felt very much guided. And my angel, my guides, whenever I need to find some information, it will be in a form of listening to a podcast, or it will be something on YouTube or something. Or maybe I need to read something. Because that's how they get our attention. That's when they impulse us. That's when there is something perhaps we're just now ready to know. So has that happened to you? Have you come across this podcast, and perhaps you're ready now to really sort of get to the real understanding of what happens? Or maybe you're just ready to know that we are alive, and in what sense? You know, what happens to us when we're not in the physical body? You know, so, you know, what happens at death? And this is really quite fascinating, quite interesting. And I would suggest don't go anywhere. Stay tuned, because I'd like to share what I have found, not through someone else's information and material, but through the past life regressions over the number of years that now I have been working in this field, what I found from real people, where I've sat opposite in my, I call it my teaching room because I do the in-person teaching. I also, do the teaching over Skype in that room, but I also do my past life regressions. So I've sat face to face with real people that have really sort of validated what I've heard and why it resonates with me, that, you know, when we die, we do live on. So what happens at death? So this is what I've found in my own experience, and I'd like to share with you. So one thing is for sure, that I've noticed, and this is what I'm from the past life regression, because it's slightly different when I do the Akashic records, because I might see a past life and it might be appropriate to sort of, what the surroundings around it. But that's me seeing that for somebody, and I discuss that with them. With the past life regression, this is somebody that's in a hypnotic state. Now, again, if you've heard me talk about this in previous podcasts, this is when we go into a frequency very similar to meditation, which is the alpha and theta. So they're in hypnosis, and that could, like I mentioned, it can be identified whether you're in a meditative state or when we're daydreaming or just before we go to sleep at night. These are all the same frequencies. We know them, we recognise them, or sometimes we recognise them, and my work has sort of led me to really understand and recognise so I can help others. But this is a frequency when we can really hear our higher self. It's where the stored memories are. This is the part of the mind where we can understand things about ourselves. So what happens at death is, what I've noticed, is something that really does happen, is the physical body dies. We have let go thousands, so many of us have had lives. We know how to do this, and that's to let go of a physical body. But something that does survive, or something that happens, is that there is a part of you and I have witnessed this, which continues on. And it's the essence of a person that is still alive. And how do I know that? Because I've spoken to people in these sessions. I've been right there with them, listening to their accounts, and they're all pretty much similar. I mean, you get so many people, hundreds and hundreds from different walks of life, different people that don't know each other, but they're all sort of saying similar things. So I speak with them, and normally when a person dies, they will talk about that. They can quite often talk about the circumstances around it. Now, incidentally, and for me too, before I did past life regressions, I had a little bit of apprehension around, I don't think I want to go through a death scene. You might be just thinking about that now, like, no. This is something I talk to people before we go into a session, is that part of you, the higher self, the bigger me, does this with divine love. It doesn't put us straight in so that we experience however way in its difficulties. We see it, if you like, from a distance, and quite often we can put it up on a screen. We don't have to relive the death. What we do is we see it from the lens of our soul, the perspective of what it really is. I've certainly seen certain experiences and lives that I have, and I've never been overwhelmed or scared. And it's never happened to not one client that I've taken this through. So it's actually quite an important part, especially through the past life regression, is to actually see in not graphic detail, but in a way of what happened. So this is something that it's done very kindly, very beautiful. Sometimes I've noticed it can be like a flash of white light, that the soul doesn't want to see anything from there. Or maybe quite often the body is there, and some will describe that they'll see that their body is there. They'll talk about what happened. Something that strikes me when this is happening in a past life regression, that there is pretty much an all-knowing from the person, that this is a part of the mind that's now observatory. They're looking at what's going on. And sometimes when they've left the body, they will look at ones that have been left behind. They'll talk about the family members, and I will perhaps say, well, who's there? They might say it's their wife, or they might say it's their child. And then this can be sometimes quite an emotional part, because the tie to that soul that's still living, there's still that bond there. And they'll talk about that I can't reach them because they're so sad. And this is always quite very interesting, that not only is there an emotion for the ones that they've left behind, and they're talking about these ones, but often when they're out of the body, they will try and message or communicate to one of the family members that is happening at that place or that scene. And this is quite interesting. And I'm going to pause for a moment here, because a lot of people that I've spoken to, and I've seen this time and time again at this point, and what happens in hypnosis and when they've left the body, is that souls will try to communicate and contact. Has that ever happened to you? Have you experienced that you have felt a loved one near you? Maybe have they tried to communicate something that you have talked about, and then when you seize that particular object or whatever it is, it reminds you of them. Now this is, for me, I think this is quite fascinating, because this happened to me. I had a message from my loved one, and that was in the form of their voice. And I heard that, not in a literal, but in my mind's eye, where they just gave me a message. And as soon as I heard it, I knew. It just resonated. It felt right. Because of what was happening at that time, they couldn't have possibly knew what was going on with me if they were no more. But the fact that, they are still alive, and the fact that they knew what was going on for me, that he managed to get that message. And it was quite interesting, because I was sat at my desk and I was in a frequency, because I had just started meditating. I was connected to source. I was feeling a little bit low, feeling a bit tearful, and I must have been in the right frequency, because I was able to get that message. Have you had a similar experience? Have you just felt, or maybe you felt them come to you in a moment, or you've just in your mind's eye seen a picture of them, and you've just felt that love, or maybe there is an emotion there because it feels so real. There was a situation that my girls always talk about. Now, I didn't see this happen, but we were there just as when he passed. The girls always, and it's quite beautiful when they talk about it, because the energy almost shifts when they talk about it, because they both saw it, because it was a very gloomy, dark day. But there was sunshine that came into the room. It's almost like the clouds broke and they saw sunshine, they saw light. And they will always talk about that, and how amazing and how he was there. That is not something that I had to actually say to them. They told me, oh, he was there. So whenever they see something very similar to that, they are aware that he's around. So has that sort of happened to you? That you seen something. Now, something else as well, and I'll just share this because it sort of gets the cogs moving. We start to then realise, right, okay. And it's like we sometimes see these things, but then we can be dismissive of them. And I remember, and this is several years prior to him passing, my dear friend, me and her and he, we were sitting in a garden and we were just chatting. And we had 3 red admirals come right between us. And for us, that was quite a moment. So we always share a joke that the red admirals, they were beautiful. In fact, they didn't just feel like they were 3 butterflies that were just randomly there. I've never since seen 3 butterflies fly, all 3 together. So anyway, that's our standing joke. And then we always talk about that with such fondness. And whenever we see a red admiral, we now always refer to my partner, because that to me just makes me think, right, okay, we remember that we shared that experience. And again, and it might get you sort of thinking as well, I remember again, I was sat at my desk, and this was shortly after when he did die. Guess what was sat outside of my window? And I would just look at that red admiral. And again, I was in a little bit of a haze at the time. I wasn't feeling 100% myself, but there was a red admiral that would position itself, and it just sat there for one day, was for a long period of time, and it would just sit there, and I would just look at it, but I hadn't quite pieced the sort of bits together. Sometimes that can happen. When I look back now, it's beautiful. We then realise, and if ever we're in the garden, me and my girls, sometimes there will be that odd occasion, and I'm not saying that every red admiral or every butterfly is, but if you get a sense of them, and normally for us, there's that one, that Potters, that will just sit there, we'll all look at each other and go, right, that's him. And that's normally not sort of one person saying it, but it's normally a feeling altogether. So it's really beautiful. And that really sort of adds weight to what I have found with so many when they're at that stage, when they go through and transition out of the body, where they do try to communicate. They do try to get messages and try to sort of evoke something that perhaps that you've shared that nobody else would know, but that person would know. And sometimes if we are in that space of grief, sometimes it's not always that we can get it. But it's, once we sort of are manoeuvring through and we're beginning to sort of, and it takes time with loss and when we're grieving, then we can sort of then start seeing these beautiful little moments of when a loved one does try to sort of let us know that they're there, they're with us. You might get a sense of that. You might feel them around you. You might see in your mind's eye a picture of them and a warm feeling. You might be quite visual. You might already be connecting with spirit, and you might see them. So it's really wonderful when, they do come and just check in on us, and that we are aware of it, whether that's cognizance or sentient-wise, that we just get a sense of that. And I know I've said before, I have done many a time when I've done a Reiki session with somebody, and it's normally, and it has a particular, for me, this is personal, because you might be already a practitioner yourself, or you might do healing, or whatever you are on your journey, you might sort of sense this, your way. But I always get a smell or it tends to be a smell. Now and again I'll get a taste smell, but that's a difference between, for me, a deceased one, and it's normally of the loved one. And when I feel that presence and that energy there, I know and I get a sense that they are having a Reiki session. It's a beautiful session for them to do some healing, to get into that frequency so that they're able to connect with source energy and just share that meditation, meditative state. And it's normally after a session, and I will ask a person, how was that for you? And they're normally quite emotional, where they'll say that loved one, they sensed them or felt them. And I had done too. And that kind of adds weight to that. So when I'm in a past life regression, and there have been many that are at that time of death, when they're able to sort of leave the body, it always, I sort of get that sense that, right, well, they do try. And, I'm able to piece it together. So this is a thing, and I always find, it's like pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. It's like when you get it from one setting to another, you can sort of piece it all together. That's how, for me, I resonate with my truth. And you'll have to resonate with your truth. What feels right, what makes sense to you. So, has that happened? Has there been perhaps a memory or maybe a situation that you hadn't quite realised that was a message? Because that's what I found to me is like pieces start sort of connecting, and then we'll start becoming more aware of things. We start tuning in a little bit more, becoming a little bit more sensitive around the energy. So rather than what we tend to do is we get that feeling and we go, no, it doesn't, because that side of our mind, the left part of the brain, the logic, kind of shuts it off. Maybe you're that kind of person. I've seen and experienced many a person, even through hypnosis, where all of a sudden the conscious mind just comes in and analyses that, or is that true, is that? And it's very beautiful, and I know how to sort of stop that, and I'm aware of that, so we can sort of get back on track, so we can just allow the higher self, the intuition, that whisper of the inner voice to sort of flow through so that we can get our truth. So that's quite a beautiful, sobering feeling that it, at that time of death, that it's not the end. And it pretty much I've read at the time in 2018 case studies from Michael Newton, but experiencing it myself, witnessing it from countless over the years of other people, has been really quite, like I'll use the word, it's sort of validated that this is a thing, that we are alive, that once we let the physical body go, there is life that continues on. But what is that life? Well, this is really quite interesting. Now, Michael Newton goes on and refers to this, and he's got countless case studies, with the journey of souls, and in his other book as well. And incidentally, they're on audio, which are on YouTube. So if you're anything like me, I'm much better listening. I can get through a book more by listening to it. And they're on YouTube, and you might want to sort of like have a look if this has really sort of got your interest. But, continuing on, well, there is life between lives. Well, what does this life look like? What is this life? So something else what happens is that quite often, continuing this sort of like, when somebody does come out of the body, there is that essence of the person that is still themselves. But it's like there is an all-knowing part the best way I honestly identify it is that it is the higher self, because it knows things much more from a different perspective, and the way that it relates and talk about things. But this is a thing I've also noticed, is that some are met with guides. And this is really beautiful when I see this happen. Because whether the male or female, this is quite often quite a choking moment. And when I mean choking, the emotion, there's a recognition of another spirit being. And when I go to ask, well, who is this? There are those that have said, oh, this is my guide. There is so much love that I have witnessed and felt from people. The love that they feel for this guide. You know, it's beautiful to sort of hear. And normally if there's a bit of motion there, I kind of just let them for that moment just to connect. And sometimes there are those that, you know, they see their guide and the guide is with them and they're off. It's like they're moving off somewhere. Something else I'd like to share with you is that sometimes there are like soul families that come to them once they've left the physical body, and they're sort of like moving. It's almost like they're moving towards a light. It's like they're moving, the sense that I have got is that they're moving out from the physical plane of the earth. They're starting to see things from a different perspective. So this soul family is also quite moving, very emotive for a person. They start recognizing loved ones, whether that be from the physical, you know, the physical life that they've left from that life. They start seeing different ones. And it's quite interesting. They can be, even though that was a past life that they've just left and come out from the body, they're also seeing people that have died in their present life, like uncle such and such, or grandma, or a partner, or whoever that is, which I'm always finding really incredible how that is. You know, this is where we talk about linear time and how really from our dense physical life that outside of that time doesn't exist. And I often see that a lot when we're sort of outside of the physical. And this is, as you can imagine, is again very emotional for the person. It's like they're being reunited with a loved one, with soul members rather, that they don't know, but they sense them. You know, and I can't often, sometimes I'm fascinated and I ask, you know who they are? I do, but they don't get a sense of quite who they are. They know that they're familiar. And that's really incredible. It's beautiful. And something else happens. They travel. It's like they're moving out of far away, sort of like from the planet Earth. That's the best way that I can put it. They're travelling. And often some relate to moving to a light or lights. And I always find this really quite amazing, because we talk about the white light. And quite often I've asked, well, that light, and again, this is often known and it's talked about with such love, that the white light, that energy, it's source, and how much love that there is. And it's beyond the physical love that we've got here on our planet. And again, that can be quite emotional for a person because they're back with source. Now, for me, that really sort of connects things, because I'm always looking at connective, what resonates with me, and how these modalities that, if you like, that we have on our planet are so powerful. Because for me, I work with the light. That's how I meditate. That's why I use the Usui Reiki method. You know, he was a monk. He knew how to meditate, but he also used a powerful, intentional process that really helps us to sort of really get rid of hit and miss when we are having difficulties meditating. You might have seen a previous podcast, Can't Meditate, Try This. You know, and one of the most powerful ways to meditate is using the Usui method, which is really powerful. It really made a difference to me. I was able to get straight in to a meditative, beautiful state of being connected to source energy. And I help others do the same, help them along the way, because it's really incredible. But that resonates with me because that's the light. That's the same source energy. That when someone has died and I'm sharing that experience and I'm feeling, and then when they hit and they come close to the light, they talk about the light in the same way, that it's incredible, and how much love and how source is. And quite often met with loving beings. These beings are, or sometimes where they talk about a life review, where, you know, once they've come from a life, they look at a life and they talk about a life. And these loving beings are not, the best way I can put it, that they're not what we have been told or led to believe, that they are sort of looking at us and being like annoyed with us or passing judgment on us. In fact, I've witnessed the opposite, where the soul is disappointed, that they've realised that they didn't make use of the opportunity in life. That's always fascinated me. And it really changed myself in my own physical life. You know, kind of makes me think, well, I want to do the best I can before I get home and get to the life review. Obviously, you know, we're all learning. We can't do things 100% here, but it's just made me realise, you know, that we not only can see this from our perspective, but it's from the perspective of the person. And there is so much love from these masters, these teachers. They're not lofty. They're not unapproachable. They have, if anything, they're the opposite. They're like source. They love. They're on a different dimensional vibration. It's beautiful. They teach. And there is so much love. And I just find it's always very interesting that there is life, you know, but it's in a life of the essence of who they are. And that continues, you know, and if anything, that has made me really sort of believe in my sense because of how it makes me feel. It's what I see from one modality to another. I work with really 3 very powerful modalities because that's what I learned in my own life, and that is with Reiki, working and connecting to source energy and the power that my own life and then what I see for others. And then there is the past life regression where I witness people going through and talking to me about where they are. And through the Akashic records of just the patterns and the karmic and how we do the same things and how we can change, you know, if we're on a trajectory that we've done before and it's not serving us, and how we can always pull that around and how our guides are helping us in our physical life. But I guess what really as always strikes me is death is not the ending of life. And I think the term transition actually explains a little bit more what goes on. It's from one physical life to another higher dimensional frequency of the essence that still lives on. And why this resonates with me, because for me, the work and what I've learnt from the Akashic Record is the essence of the soul. Who we are at soul level, we're all different. We all have a vibrational likeness. We've all started our soul evolution, our growth in different ways. And this always kind of underpins, well, I know that because I've seen that through the Akashic Records. So it's really incredible that life does continue. And I always think we're here in the physical 3D, and this feels so long. But you know what? We're actually, if we took the element of time out of it, we're actually more in our spirit form, in the essence without of a body than in. And that is always met with a really sort of profound, quite feeling and sensation when I say that, because there's no time. There's only time here on our planet Earth. There is no time from, and that is what I've seen when I've worked in the Akashic Records, to when I've seen how people talk through the hypnotic state, and when they're in past life regression, there is no time. And that's really incredible. That's really wonderful. It's also very powerful and very loving, and has helped me, and I hope that this information has helped if that has been your experience of loss. Where are they? And we find comfort sometimes in what we've been told to believe. And the popular ones, this is in heaven and hell. What I have found through my own work, not necessarily just reading from others, although that resonated with me, but I have found that no one's gone to anywhere that has been judgment, that has been hurtful. In fact, it's just been the opposite. There's been so much love. There has been so much support for that soul. Sometimes when a soul has come from a life, they go somewhere and they rest. Their guides are with them. There's so much love with them. I've seen some souls that go straight back in, and they're almost like in a classroom, and they're learning. It's almost like there's another life. The life between lives, how that is packed with so much meaning. So that our loved ones, no matter what the circumstances of their transition, their death, that's another thing that I have found very, very heartwarming, is that out of the body they are able to see it for what it is. The real problem, if you like, the real issue is for us that have left behind, because we've got to deal with that void. We've got to, deal with that loss. And it's okay to grieve, no matter what we know. At the time, I've experienced the loss of my mum in a car crash when I was young. I've lost my dad when I'm in my 30s, and then to my partner, in 2018. And grief is grief. There is always going to be a period after where we don't feel right, and Source knows that. Even with the knowledge and understanding we've got, we're not superhuman. We're still here in the flesh. We're still what's termed as having a human experience. So it takes time. And sometimes we're not the same because we miss that person. But there is a very beautiful, beautiful thing that I have witnessed and I have seen, is that loved ones do try to message us. They do try to contact us. And that's really beautiful. And maybe you've begun to realise that has happened with you. You know, that is something that perhaps, if you haven't realised before, that maybe you've put two and two together. Maybe it was dismissed, or maybe we were just not in a right frame. You know, we weren't quite there. There was a couple of things that I had to go over for me to realise that's, yes, I did realise that. But for some reason, and our frequency, and when we're in stress, when we're upset, and especially when we're grieving, sometimes we can't always get that sense. So I hope you've found this information timely. And that was one of the reasons why I chose to talk about something like this, because when I sat at that time, I felt very lost, felt a little empty, and I just asked for my guides just to help me, and I say stumbled across, but I feel very much now, when I look back, I was guided to just hear of Michael Newton and what he wrote books about and what he talked about, life between lives. And I hope that you have found this timely, and that perhaps it has come at the right time for you, as it did with my experience. And it's also giving comfort for those who are grieving and perhaps going through sickness, and, you know, when things are not going right with loved ones, or maybe that there is that loss. But I hope you find this information useful. So please do hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss any more of these podcasts, where I do them weekly and talk about many subjects to help us through our physical lives. But in particular, that we see it through the lens of our soul, because for me, that's where I found the comfort. Without that, it doesn't mean anything. The loss is just hard. But when we start seeing it through the lens of our soul, then it certainly does add some level of healing and some level of understanding through this. And it helps us to get through hard times. So I'm on YouTube, Spotify, and you can find me on other platforms. You might like to visit the website at learnreikiandconnect.co.uk. And what you'll find there is what I've put together is some home learning. You know, if you like to do online Reiki, or you have the option that you can actually work with me over Skype, learning Reiki, and that's level 1, 2 and 3. And there's a various amount of reasons as to why people do choose to learn it over Skype. You know, maybe you don't have the childcare. Maybe you can't take a whole day off of work. Sometimes we can't find the time to do the travel, and you can't get to me. So, and I've even had those that can't leave their pets, and it just works so much better if they do the Skype learning Reiki, you know, over Skype, that we can do this together. You might want to have a look at what that looks like and the sessions. And of course, if you would like to perfect the art of dowsing using the pendulum, so check out the online course there and workshop of how to speak with your higher self using the pendulum. So I hope you found this information timely and useful, as I've said. And I look forward to speaking with you till next time. Do take care, and bye for now.